Hey, welcome back to the Bandsawmill build. In the last video, you guys saw me make these bandsaw wheels, which is actually a lot more work than I was expecting. But in today's video, I'm going to be making the two parts of the couplers that attach to the shafting. It's going to be 2 parts per piece, that's 4 parts total. And I'm going to be making the head that connects everything together. So by the end of this video, I'm going to have something that actually kind of resembles a bandsaw. So that's exciting. Screw the rest of this intro, I'm ready to get working. Let's go! How's it going, everybody? Unfortunately, I am very sick today, so hopefully that doesn't become too distracting. So I need a way of connecting the wheels to the head of the mill. And once you put tension between the 2 wheels with the bandsaw blade, the wheels are going to have a tendency to bend in a little bit. So what I need to do is find some way of making an adjustment to control the yaw of the wheels. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting all the pieces that are going to make up the housing that holds the shaft of the wheel itself. This piece that holds the shaft has to be incredibly robust. So I started out by gluing 2 2x4s side to side, and I had to make 4 of those. And then after I let them dry for about an hour or so, I came back and I decided to glue them together into their final form. Instead of gluing them together into a giant block that I had to later cut down, I decided just to offset the glue up. I wanted the adjustment screw to have something incredibly substantial to rest on, and gluing it together this way also saves a few steps. And after I got everything sanded down, it was time to make the second half of the coupler assembly. I have no idea what to call these parts. I have to make the housing that goes around this block. Now the housing actually serves as 2 functions here. The first is that it acts as a housing for the block so that we can have the wheel adjustment, but it's also going to serve as the tensioner for the bandsaw blade. So it's going to need to be robust enough to be pulled in from one side, as well as needing a few runners on the top and the bottom so it slides easily inside the head of the mill. The majority of this project is just built up using different sizes of 2x4. I either use a 2x4 that I rip the edges off of to make them nice and clean, or I'll rip them down into something like a 2x2. I did that mostly just for simplicity's sake, but it's really nice to have all of this extra stability in your pieces. An alternative to this would have been to make a good portion of this housing out of hardwood, which is probably what I should have done, at least with this center blocking, but all that would have cost considerably more. Now that I have the parts of the assemblies made, I can finally start working on the head of the mill itself. The idea here is pretty simple, and this is one of the things that got me to want to do the project in the first place. All it is 2 2x4s with another 2x4 ripped down into a 2x2 sandwiched between them. So this really only takes about 6 2x4s to make the entire head of the mill. Hypothetically. And you can see here how everything is starting to fit together. Both assemblies will sit inside the track of the mill, and the block that's going to be holding the shaft of the wheel sits inside that housing. Now that that's done, I can start drilling the hole for the shafting, and this needs to be an incredibly tight fit. Now in a little bit, I'm going to be putting a nut in the end of this housing, so I decided to clean up the ends using the table saw. Unfortunately, this didn't fit on my nice sled, and my bigger sled isn't exactly square, so I just used the miter gauge. It worked well enough. And this is another one of those really interesting things that I took off of Matthias's build. Instead of using something like a hinge, which is what I would normally think I would need here, I just put 2 bolts through this instead. Since you really never need more than maybe 3 or 4 degrees of adjustment, you really don't need the full range of a hinge to make this piece work. And in the long run, this is much more robust. Now I want to bring up the fact that I used a lot of different kinds of hardware on this project, and that's really just because it's what I had, but if I was going to do this project over, I would just do all of these pieces with threaded rod, and what that'll do is, when you're using the mill in the future, you only need one size wrench to make any of your adjustments. I decided to put tracking on both the left and right assemblies because I didn't want any chance of the wheels losing alignment, and I also wanted more ability to pull the wheels left and right depending on the size of the blade. I wasn't 100% sure I was going to get my spacing right, and so I wanted a couple of inches of play. Also, that allows me some opportunity to play with the size of the bandsaw blade later. So the way I'm setting up this outer block is kind of funny. I wanted the nut to be embedded inside the assembly, but this outer block is only recessed to hold the washer. The reason I did it that way was because I wanted to embed the nut in there so it wouldn't spin, but I also wanted the extra resistance of the washer to make sure it doesn't pull through the wood. This here is the first part that I did that isn't 100% mirrored left and right. Although I did drill the same hole on each side, I wanted to make sure there was no binding in my threaded rod. So I was able to put my countersink in the middle of this block and transfer the hole to the outside block. And then I can use that reference to drill a slightly oversized hole for the threaded rod. Now right around this point is where I realized that my tracking adjustment didn't actually do exactly what I thought it was going to once everything was assembled. The tension that I just built was working very well, but what the tracking was doing was pulling the adjustment block from a positive 5 degrees to a 0 degrees, but I needed it to pull from 0 degrees to a negative 5 degrees, so I got that a little bit backwards. What I decided to do was to just put a block on the outside of the assembly so that I could put a bolt through that and pull on the shaft block from the back. And then I could just flip the whole assembly upside down, which was going to allow me to pull it past that 90-degree spot. And now that I have this block on the back, I can pull on the shaft block. And now I have proper tracking. And now I figured it was a good time to put the wheels on. I was wrong, but I did think that at the time. You can see right here I'm putting a piece of blocking on the front of the housing assembly. I knew I needed a little bit of extra rigidity in the front of it because there was going to be a lot of pressure on the shafting. I did eventually have to pull these wheels off and replace these with a piece of hardwood later, but that wasn't even the biggest mistake I made. The biggest mistake I made actually had to do with the construction of the housing itself. Either way, this was the first time I got a chance to put the bandsaw blade on. I was really excited. The first thing I noticed after I put the blade on was that the tracking adjustment that was pulling on the shaft needed a little bit more support on this backside. The shaft was sort of just mushing that soft wood, so I put a little piece of hardwood tabletop that I had on the back of the shaft block. And the cool thing about this is because it's on the back, I can add as many pieces on the back as I want if I feel like I need more support back here. But one ended up being plenty enough.
Okay, now that this thing is up on my table, as cool as this thing looks with the blade on, it's making me realize one egregious error that I made. I still just cut those off. So ignore the 2x4s that this is sitting on for a second. The bottom of my frame is right here. You can see where my blade is. And maybe it's easier to see right here. I have almost no capacity. I'd be lucky if I could get a 2x4 out of this, and that would probably be touching my frame. I had originally planned on the head of this to be a lot thinner, but because every measurement is based off of something else, it ended up being that size. A lot bigger than I was originally intending. So I can either redesign the head or redesign the wheels, or I can just create a little C-channel center section, which is what I'm going to do.
I decided to go ahead and cut these threaded rods down to size finally, because I could finally see that my wheels were in the right spot, and then I could remove both assemblies from the head so that I could work on the head by itself. The solution I came up with was pretty simple. All I really did was glue a 2x4 into the center of the track and then put 2x4s on the outside, creating a new track, and then put a 2x2 in the middle of that new track, if that makes any sense. This is also when Ellie decided to come in and hang out for a bit.
Come on in.
I swear that child can smell a bag of chips from a block away. So here I'm putting glue inside the track, and then I can put the 2x4 inside the track and screw that into place. And then I can add the other two pieces of 2x4 on the outside of that and clamp all that up so it stays nice and true. And then one more piece of 2x2 in the top.
What are you doing?
I see your neck. I see your face.
I messed up my frame rate trying to focus on Ellie. So now what I needed to do is to mark out a center section on the original frame to see what I can cut out and make room for the C-channel. What I decided to do was to mark in about 6 inches from the edge of my joint here that I had made, and then I could cut along that as well as right down the center of these two 2x4s on the face here. This is one of those moments where having a professional track saw would really come in handy, but I'm still just using this really old hardboard one I made, must have been a decade ago. But it does work. I really don't use it often enough to consider buying one. And then I could repeat the entire process on the other side as well. And because of the shape of the circular saw, it leaves just a little bit of material in the corner. So I was able to cut through the sides with the saw, but the center was a lot harder to get the saw in there, so I just chiseled it out. And this actually worked very well.
I did it!
I could have done this a number of different ways, but I decided to go at the high spots with the hand plane, and then I switched over to a belt sander to clean up the rest of it. And this actually ended up looking really nice when I was done.
There we go. No! Get out of there! Oh my gosh.
Once everything was set up, these wheels and the assemblies ended up very heavy, and also there wasn't enough space in here to be able to put this threaded rod through the hole when I was trying to reassemble everything. But once everything gets put together, there's actually a ton of room for adjustment. And then I can reattach the head of the mill together, and you know what? It's done. The head of the mill is finally done. And I am so happy with the way this is going.
Alright. Okay. That looks better, doesn't it? We have almost exactly 6 inches of cut capacity. My plan was to make this cut a minimum of a 4x4, so this gives me a little bit of extra room to play. So, good. We got it. You are so silly.
Your tape measure.
You want the tape measure?
Oh, see in there too.
Oh, you want your blue tape measure?
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Alright, you gonna help me with the outro this time?
Yeah.
Alright, stand up.
This is the little one.
Alright, we're talking to the camera now. Alright, thank you all for watching. If you want to see the playlist, check it out at the end of this video. It'll take you to all of the videos in this series. Until then, see you in the next video. Say goodbye.
Nope.
Say goodbye to YouTube. Say goodbye.
No.
Ellie, you have to say goodbye. You have to tell them goodbye.
No.
Alright, you ready to go? I'll hop down. Alright, grab it. Wow!